So welcome to the evening with Nick Dunhill about scratch building a locomotive footplate. Nick Dunhill is a member of the Gauge Guild Technical Committee, and tonight he's continuing his series of presentations on scratch building a locomotive, and this time he shows us how to build a footplate. This follows the boiler, smoke box and firebox demonstrations in earlier sessions, and if you've not seen them already, you can still watch them via the Gauge Guild YouTube channel. Just search for Nick Dunhill. Welcome, Nick. Thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, James, and welcome to everybody, and thank you for coming along. This evening, as James said, we're going to continue the series of presentations that I've done about scratch building a locomotive. Previously, we covered the smoke box and the boiler and the firebox, and tonight we're going to have a stab at a footplate, and I'll explain how to cut the footplate out, how to mark out and things like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch you over to the camera that's above my head just here and show you some stuff. Can everybody see that? So the locomotive that we've been working on for the last few presentations is this, and it's a Hull and Barnsley locomotive, and it's a 240 loco that was built, I'm guessing, in the 1890s, and it was built by Bayer Peacock in Manchester. We've already built the smoke box in the first presentation, and in the second presentation we built the boiler and the firebox, but we built these as separate assemblies. So because I kind of think it makes it a little bit easier not to have to unwrap part of the boiler once you've rolled it up to form the base of the firebox. So tonight we're moving on to the footplate, and we're going to make the footplate with the valance that's along the bottom of it, and then the drag beam that's at the rear and the buffer beam that's at the front. And if we've got time, we might have a pop at the cab as well. The first thing that occurred to me about this was really trying to select some suitable material. I kind of looked at the footplate, and it's quite simple, it's quite straightforward. It's just a big rectangular piece. There are no folds in it, no curves around the wheels and things like that. It's very flat and very simple. So I thought a good material to make it out of would be nickel silver, and I decided to make it out of 0.45 millimetre. Now you'll have to forgive me because I don't really work in imperial sizes, but that's obviously, I don't know how many thou it is. So the footplate top I decided to make out of 0.45, and in fact I think it's all made out of 0.45, yes it is. So the first stage really was to scale the drawing, because this drawing came to me as a PDF and I printed it out, and for some reason they always print out very slightly undersized on my printer. So I kind of took a datum point. It was probably the 6-foot wheelbase, and then measured it, and I found out that actually the drawing is 3% undersized. So any measurement you take off the drawing, you have to times by 1.03 to give you the true scale. So that was my first step. And after that, I did a very rough sketch there, if you'll excuse the poor quality of it. And this is a kind of a rectangle. Obviously, the measurements are taken from the width of the footplate there and the length of the footplate here, all the way along the loco. That's a very straightforward measurement. Now, the next thing I had to take into consideration was what gauge the loco was going to be built in, and it's actually going to be a fine scale loco. So obviously the frames on a fine scale loco are a little bit narrower than would be prototypical, because the fine scale wheels have got a 29.2 back to back, as I'm sure you all know. And it kind of means that your frames need to be compressed inwards by something like 3 millimeters. Well, I mean, obviously you can make it as narrow as you like, but I think for a loco like this, you really don't need any end float on the driving wheels, but you need to have a think about I'm guessing the front wheel's a radial truck, and that will need to rotate from side to side, so the whole shooting match will go around a 6-foot radius curve. So with that in mind, I decided that a good width for the frames would be 27 millimeters. That's the outside dimensions of the frames. Now, at that point, there needs to be a rectangle cut out of the middle of the frame where the inside motion will show through. Obviously, on a real locomotive, the frames aren't continuous across the loco. They kind of usually come up to the edge of the frame and stop. But in this case, you can see there's a section of the, just here, there's a section of the chassis that sticks up above the footplate. So the footplate needs to go up to the side of the frame and then stop. So we were working on 27 millimeters for that. So first of all, we need a rectangle cutting in the middle of our footplate that's 27 millimeters wide, and it needs to extend from the back of the smoke box here to the front of the firebox here. So you take that measurement and make that there. So now you have the basic rectangle in the middle of the footplate that you're going to need to accommodate the frames. And then we move on, because obviously then there needs to be a cutout in the frames then to accommodate the wheels. So the two wheels there, and additionally, you need a cutout for this splasher here. You've got two splashers on this loco. You've got these splashers here that sit over the wheels, and then an additional splasher outboard of them that accommodates the movement of the coupling rod as it goes round. And you can see on the plan of the drawing that the additional splasher extends to here. So you need cutouts here on your footplate for the wheels that extend into the cab, and then you need an additional cutout here for the coupling rod. And I think I took from about here to here. In fact, you can, because you probably can't see, but I put some little pencil marks where I estimated that this would need to be relieved in the footplate. So, having done all that, of course, then you come up with something like this that's just a very rough sketch with lots of kind of dimensions on it that I've worked out, and you end up cutting out a piece of. Can you all see that? You end up cutting out a piece of nickel silver that's that shape. Now, obviously, there is no secret to this. Sorry, guys. You just have to get your ruler and your micrometer, your vernier, and you just have to draw it on the nickel silver, and then you just have to get your trusty piercing saw and cut it out. And it is quite time consuming, cutting things out and then filing up to the lines that you've scored on the piece of sheet. But that's how it's done. And you can see that the smoke box is going to sit here on the solid bit of the footplate. We've got a relief here for the chassis, and then we've got a little relief here and here for the wheels, and then this section here has been chopped away to relieve the footplate for the movement of the coupling rods just there. So that's your basic footplate.
Quick question, Nick.
Yeah, go on then.
Any particular reason for nickel silver rather than brass?
The recovery in Sweden was phenomenal.
I've got loads of nickel silver. No reason. That's the only reason I use nickel silver, because I've got lots of it. People. I mean, it's kind of slightly more difficult to form than brass. It's a bit more springy. But the payback for that is that once you start soldering it, it tends not to distort as much as brass. So. But really, the only reason I've made it in nickel silver is because I've got piles of nickel silver over there in the workshop. So, the next bits you need to cut out are the valance. That's this bit here that supports the footplate. Now, again, there's no secret to that. You just need to measure the length and then the overall height of a thin strip, and then cut out the bit you don't need. But what I always tend to do, and this again is cut out of 0.45. Is that 18th out, 0.45? Somebody
yes,
else.
it is. That's actually quite a common thickness for model kits.
Yeah. It's what most etched kits are made out of, isn't it? Either that or the other chassis, and they're usually made out of 0.8. And what I always tend to do, what I always do when I'm making a valance, is to cut it off the end of the sheet. So sort of cut it off the very end of the sheet and draw a line at the height that you need, and then mark out on the edge of the sheet the bit you need to cut out. And it's easier to cut this bit out first before you slice the valance off the sheet, because obviously when you're filing and cutting here, everything's nicely supported and you're not likely to bend it. Because I think the problem with cutting these things out with nickel silver is once you bend it, that's it, it's scrap. You can never make it straight again. So the best thing to do, you spend more time trying to straighten it out than you will actually cutting another one out. So secret there is just to be very careful. So I did cut out a pair of valances, and there's one. You can see that, that's got the curvy bit there at the front. And obviously once I cut one out, I just laid that down over the sheet and then just drew that, scored around that so that they matched. Or another good idea might be to solder this to the sheet and then just, use it as a template for cutting the second one out. And then at least, you've got two that are identical. So that's the valances, and they are very time consuming just to go along with a piercing saw. And I've got two piercing saws. I've got this one, but of course, the problem with this one is that when you get to about here, cutting it out, you kind of run out of loop. So the saw won't actually cut the whole thing. So I do have another one that I inherited from one of my grandfathers, which I think actually strictly is a woodworking piercing saw. And you can see it's got an enormous frame for cutting the last bit out, although it's a bit difficult to make it go kind of in a straight line because it's so big and unwieldy. So I only ever cut the last bit out with that. And then the last pieces that we need are the buffer beams, and they're obviously very straightforward. You just measure them off the front and the rear elevations of the drawing, and cut them out. And then what I've done is flipped them over and marked out. I don't know whether you can see that, but there's all kinds of lines scored on the back of it that just mark out the positions of the rivets. And they've all been punched through. You can see on the other side. Let's see if I can move the light over. You can maybe see that a little bit better. No, that's not really going to work, is it? But really, what I've done there is just marked out the position of each individual rivet and punched them through. I think that's where the expression rivet counter comes from, isn't it? And I've done the same on the back of the drag beam as well. You can see that's just been out of a sheet of nickel silver, and I've fretted the holes out of it for the drag beam. The drawbar itself. And again, I've marked out the positions of the rivets and punched them out in the metal. You can see that, you can there, look, can't you? They're all marked out on the back here, and then punched out. And I did make these buffing plates here to look. There's a buffing plate there and a buffing plate there, and they appear on the drawings just here and here, and they're just simply cut out of some waste material. So then we end up with basic pieces. We've got a footplate, we've got a buffer beam, got a drag beam, and we've got a pair of valances like that. And now it's time to assemble it. Now, obviously, on a commercial kit, what you tend to get on the bottom of the footplate is a nice half-etched line that you can drop your valance into. Now, of course, when you scratch building, you don't get that. So I don't know whether you can see. I think you can. I wiggle this about. What I've done is I've cut out some very, very, very small pieces, little tiny pieces of nickel silver, just sliced off a piece of waste off the end of an edge. And obviously I've scored a line on the underside of the footplate where the inside edge of the valance needs to fall, so that the outside edge of the valance is then the correct distance away from the edge of the footplate. And you can see that measurement here, look, on the plan view. That's the dotted line there is where the valance needs to land. So anyway, what I've done is I've cut out these very small pieces and I've soldered them so that one straight edge of them is right up against the scarred line. And then what I can do then is fold the valance on top and push them up against the little squares there, look, which I'll show you in a minute when I come to solder this on. And that just helps you to locate the valance, and it means that the valance will then fall in the correct position and parallel to the edge of the footplate, which is obviously what we want to achieve. And you can see that I've already done the first one. The first one was, you can still see I've left in place the little alignment things. Can you see that? You can. I've left them in place. I mean, you could take them off if you wanted, if you thought they were a bit ugly or something. And then I would just work my way around. I'll put one of the valances on. Obviously, you mark where the end of the valance needs to stop. And actually, what I did do was just solder a little piece on the end, you know, as an end stop, and then took that off. I've also scarred a line where the buffer beam needs to land, but I'm kind of going to work my way around, and I've obviously put on the drag beam. Next, I'm going to demonstrate putting on the other valance along there, and then finally we'll put the buffer beam on. Right, so let's have a crack at doing that. Just clear all these bits of paper off my workbench. Right, you can see what I'm, you probably can't actually, but this here is a piece of, move me along, excuse me. The thing I'm working on, the surface, is just a piece of plate glass. It's just something I bought from a local glazier, and it's just an offcut. And it's about, it looks like it's about 8 millimeters thick. But it is completely flat. If you drop a straight edge on it, you can see that it's really flat. So it's a good thing for building really flat things on, like the things that need to be very flat. The downside to it, of course, is that it sucks a lot of heat out of your soldering iron. So you can only really stand the workpiece on it to tack the pieces in place, and then you'll see what I'll do then probably is get rid of the glass sheet and do the final soldering with it not there. Right, so what we're going to do, you see, is move the valance, position the valance. Can you all see that okay? Mm-hmm. I'm pushing the valance up against the little pieces of waste that I've soldered near to the edge as alignment guides. And just position it there with the tweezers and try to hold it up with my fingers. Push it up against that one there. Ensure everything's aligned. And we'll go for a tack. That's pretty vertical, but we'll check that in a minute. A little dab of solder on, a little dab of flux, sorry. A bit of soldering iron. Have a bit of solder. Just tap that there. Right, so that's the first joint. So what I'm doing now is just checking that the thing is vertical. It certainly looks it. So now we'll go for a second tack just here. So the flux, tiny tack. You can see I'm using very little solder. Just a tiny tack there, just to hold it in place. I'm going to go back to the first one because I'm not particularly happy with that. Align the front of the valance just there up against its alignment mark. Just re-tack that like so. That's nice and straight now. So you can see we've got the valance kind of roughly tacked in 2 places onto the edge of the footplate. Then I'm just going to look. You can see it's slightly sloping. So we're going to go for a third tack, but this time I'm going to put a bit of lead on this end of the footplate to make sure that the footplate doesn't rise up above the surface of the glass, and we'll just hold that in a pair of tweezers like so. So it's approximately vertical, and we'll go for the third tack. Just right there on the alignment mark. Try not to solder my thumb. There we go. Just have a look at that, and I'm pretty happy that that's vertical. You can see that, can't you? Pretty happy with that. And if you look down the valance, you can see that the other end of the valance is quite nicely buttered up against the drag beam, and also is itself vertical with respect to the edge of the drag beam there. So we'll go for a tack, the last tack, to get this in position, like so. Bit of flux, tiny bit of solder, a dab, and we're done. Right, so that's the valance tacked in place. I'm quite happy with that. It's nice and straight. Decide to line down it, and it's nice and vertical as well. So perhaps a good place to start now soldering up would be just to tack it the end of the valance to the drag beam. So tiny bits of solder every time you do this. So the least you put on, the least there is to clean off at the end. Right, I'm kind of happy with that. The footplate's still nice and straight. So I'm going to tack it a few times now in between the original tacks. And you're going to have to be very careful. I'm going to have to be really careful soldering the valance in this area, because the valance itself is very thin, but also the piece of footplate that I'm trying to tack it to is also very thin, and there's always a chance that it'll distort if you're not extra careful. So what I've got here, I've got myself a drill, look, and then rest a file on. Use the file to press down on the valance. Just put a nice lump of lead there to hold everything in place. I'm pressing down slightly on the valance so the footplate doesn't distort when I hit it with this heat. So we'll just put a little tack there like so. We'll move along to here, I think, first. I'm kind of very cautious about doing this bit because I really don't want anything to distort, so I'm going to have to be as quick as I possibly can with my soldering iron.
What's the wattage of the iron, Nick?
I'm not sure. That's a good question.
I mean, the 50 watt is normally recommended. Is
well, this is, as you can see, this is a ERSA and ERSA eye tool,
right.
And I think it's kind of variable, isn't it? Because the control box is trying to maintain the tip temperature no matter what I do with it. So I'm guessing the power will just vary, won't it? Anyway, so we'll tack it there. Can you see that? Oh, I'm out of shot there. Sorry about that. Let's move it up. Again, you can see I'm resting me an old file on a drill that's about the same diameter as the height of the footplate now, plus the balance, and I'm just going to tack it there, and then we'll do another little tack just here as well, and then I think we're going to be brave and try and solder it all up. Boom. There we go, and you can see there we're just very, very quick tacks. Just checking again, and the footplate's nice and straight there. And the balance is also nice and straight, so I'm happy with that. Ooh, I haven't said that, it just wiggles in a little bit here, so let's just walk that back out. Check that, that's spot on now. So what I did was I just put the iron on one of the tacks and just move the balance so that the balance is now straight in that direction. So I think next thing really is just to solder the damn thing up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it like that. See, I've gripped it using a pair of tweezers. And we'll go for this solder here, this tack here, and we'll just move that along a little bit very quickly. Same in the other direction. So that's, if you look on this side now, it's all nicely soldered up. The footplate's still nice and straight, so is the valance. So we're happy with that. So we'll move on to the front bit. Just put the flux in there. Need a bit more solder now. Just along that. There we go. That's that soldered up. So we soldered now from there to the front. So we'll do the back. Use my tweezers for this. Rip it. Bit of flux. I'm using liquid flux, by the way. I get it from Hobby Holidays, but other fluxes are available. It's kind of a phosphoric acid flux, and it does mean that you have to clean everything at the end of every session to neutralize all the acids. And what I always use is just sodium bicarbonate, which is, you get it in any supermarket. It's rising agent for baking with, and it's a mild base, and it just neutralizes the phosphoric acid, which is a mild acid. And, so the acid doesn't carry on eating away at your metal after you've finished your session. Anyway, you can see what I'm doing, look. I'm just gripping the balance and the footplate together with tweezers, just very quickly moving the, that's hot. Very quickly moving the soldering line along, and just moving the blobs of solder along the edge of the balance like that. Try not to dwell, because obviously if you put too much heat into it, it will distort. And I'm going to be very brave and grown up and try and solder these bits here without distorting anything. So this is the bit of the evening that I've been dreading the most. Do that very, 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 very quickly. There we go. Lovely. Happy with that. Let's do the next bit. There's my flux applied with a couple of cocktail sticks that have been taped together.
Tony's kindly looked up the Ursa icon and found it's an 80-watt iron.
80 watt.
Which is, as you say, the benefit is that you get a lot of heat in it very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're very good at maintaining the tip temperature. I mean, I use this all day, every day. So I kind of sort of need good quality soldering iron. But I mean, there are still good quality soldering irons on the market for less. But you won't be able to hear this, but every time you put the soldering iron onto your workpiece, you can hear the control box starting to buzz a little bit, you know, as it's putting out more current to maintain the tip temperature. So we've done that there. We've gone all the way along there with the soldering iron, and as you could see, I only did it in very small sections and joined them all up, and that's resulted in a footplate that, well, you can see there. Look, it's still nice and straight. If you look at the valance is also nice and straight, and it's perpendicular to the surface of the footplate, so we're happy with that. And the next stage is to just get all the excess solder off. Now I'm going to use this, which is my faithful old mini craft mini drill, and I'm sure you've all got much better ones than this. But Minicraft on their website, they sell these little rubber pads that you can stick circular sanding discs off. Now I make these myself. It's just wet and dry paper that's got double-sided tape stuck on the back, and then I draw around this fake pound coin that I've had on my workbench for years and cut them out to that size. And if I switch this on, all I'm going to do, and you won't be able to hear me while I'm doing it, is just to run the sander just along the inside edge there, just to get the excess solder off, just like so. So that's got the worst off, and then I always take a scalpel and just scrape into the corner, get all the other pieces off to get a nice, neat inside soldered joint, like so. And then take your scalpel again and go down the front face between the bottom of the footplate and the top of the valance, just to get all of anything that might have crept through underneath your joint. Get that out. Give yourself a nice crisp joint. And you can't see this, but the cat is currently scratching my arm just down here. Bugger off. That doesn't speak the same language as me. And I'm going to just finish it off on this edge, look, with just some wet and dry paper just to smooth all that out nicely. So that's the valance on. So we've now got our scratch built footplate with 2 valances and a drag beam, and the drag beam's got a couple of buffing plates on it. So we're well down the road with that. I'm just going to check the final straightness, and there's a bit of a curve developed there, but that's it. Straighten that out. So
do you always do that by eye, or do you also use a straight edge?
I always use my ichrometer.
Your ichrometer.
My ichrometer. You can always pop a straight edge on it.
Yeah.
Like so, that helps too. But that's that done, and the last bit of this job is to solder on the buffer beam, and obviously the buffer beam is very straightforward because that just sits on the, if you've cut everything out accurately, it just sits on the front of the valance like so. So that's very easy to add. We can just hold that with our fingers, get it aligned so it's right in the middle, and again it's vertical. Just put a little tack just there in that corner, just to hold it, and then we'll double check it and move it if needs be. So a little bit of solder on the middle. Kind of happy with the central position of that, so we'll just tack that there right at the top edge. And tack that at top if I let go, which will fall off. Pop it, cat. Never work with children and pets. Go away. Right, and I'm happy with that. Again, you look here to make sure it's perpendicular to the footplate, and it's in the middle of the footplate as well. And I've got kind of a centre line down the middle, the lightly scored centre line that I'm lining up with the hole that I cut in the you see I cut a little hole there in the buffer beam, and that'll obviously have the draw bar, the draw hook through it at some point, and then a couple of little holes there to mark you see them from the top, just a couple of little holes to mark the positions of the buffers. And I haven't got any buffers for it yet, so I don't know how big that hole needs to be. So we'll just got a couple of little alignment holes there just to get us going. Right, and we'll tack this there then on the other side, just like so. Little tack there. And then when I go back here, I can see that the valance isn't quite lined with the edge of the buffer beam. So we're going to grab hold of that. Just ease the valance over a little bit. Let's see. Perfect. Great. Right.
While we're on the subject of the draw hook that you've mentioned, how'd you cut that slot?
Well, I just drilled 2 tiny holes and joined them up with a piercing saw.
Okay.
So there's nothing more sophisticated than that. And there's a little oval plate there on it that the coupling hook goes through, and that I think is left over from I think it's CPL. When you buy a CPL coupling, you get a whole little panel with lots of different shapes of these sort of strengthening plates here.
Yeah, that's right, you do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I always save those because they always come in useful, don't they? And that's what that is. It's just a leftover from something else. Now you can see I've got the buffer beam tight up against the bottom of the footplate, and the footplate's still nice and straight there along that edge. So we're going to go for a tack in the middle and hold it with your fingers or some tweezers and just put a little tack in there. And, bump like that. And now I'm happy that that's parallel with the front. It's also perpendicular. These are square to the sides of the buffer beam. The valances are square to the sides of the buffer beam, and the buffer beam's in the middle of the footplate. So that's that assembly kind of done, isn't it? So we're going to start there at the bottom of the valance in the corner, get a little bit of solder on our soldering iron, and then just go along there like that. Join up to the tack that we did previously. I'll do it again on the other side. There we go. That's that nicely joined up. Go into that corner down there. Just make sure that the buffer beams are nicely attached to the valance, because you need to make sure these are quite securely attached, because of course they're going to pull the weight of the train when you go in reverse.
The solder you're using, what temperature?
It's well, it's that's it. It's 0.4, 140. Is it 145 degrees?
145.
It's just detailing solder.
Okay.
I don't really like using any solder that's any higher melting point than that on structures like this, because you're going to have to put so much heat into the workpiece that you're just kind of running a much bigger risk of distorting something. And as I said at the beginning, if you once it starts to distort, it's very difficult to get the distortion out. In a sense, it's your workpiece is scrap, really. You need to kind of cut another one out, I think. And 145, you know, it gives you enough strength, I think.
Oh, plenty, yeah. Agreed.
And you see what I'm doing now is just scratching all the snotty bits of solder that were left over on the back of the valance. We're kind of finishing it off now, making it look quite pretty. Scratching it with just a scalpel blade, curved scalpel blade. It matters so much if you leave a few scratch marks on the inside. It's just nice to get all the blobby bits of solder off. And then similarly, so if we go in there with the scalpel and you just scrape any excess solder away. You need to try and get everything off because, of course, ultimately the ends of the chassis are going to sit here in this corner, and if there's a big fillet of solder there, it's going to sit proud of the rest of the footplate. So that's the basic footplate made. So, of course, it was cut out, measured and cut out, and then soldered up, and it's very similar to the kind of work you would do building a kit, other than the fact that, of course, all the pieces are pre-etched for you. So that's a footplate. It's all nice and straight. Just have one last check, and I'm happy with that. So if we have a quick look at the drawing, you can see that we've got our footplate and the chassis. These pieces are going to go, sides here are going to go right up against the sides of the chassis here as they appear on above the footplate. What I would do if I were making this loco, I would make the chassis full height here. I wouldn't go soldering that piece to here. I would make the whole chassis go through that hole, and then maybe just solder this piece on here that's down the sides of the smoke box. I will put those on, plant them on the top of the footplate, and this piece will be part of the chassis. But maybe we'll come to that in a later presentation. It does mean, however, that the compromise, there's going to be a huge compromise here because we've already discussed that we've narrowed the width of the chassis frames by something like 3 millimeters, less than prototypical. That does mean that if you want the chassis here below the footplate and the chassis here above the footplate to coincide, and I always try to make that so, because especially if the loco's got inside motion, you're going to be looking down there and it looks a bit daft if there's a step, in my view. But of course the payoff for that is that the bottom here, the bottom of your smoke box, is going to have to be narrower than it is prototypically, because of course the frames are set in. So bear that in mind when building your smoke box. Right, so the next thing I thought, as soon as I had a little bit of extra time, was to make this, which is the cab. Now, again, the cab is taken. I started by building the front of the cab, the spectacle plate, and you can obviously pick this measurement, these measurements up here off the drawing, or here if you prefer. You need to position, work out where your windows lie, find the centres of those. You can see I've done that there on the drawing. Mark those out, and to cut these out, what I did was drill the hole as big as I dare. It's a bit difficult with a normal drill like this, trying to drill through very thin material, because it can quite easily snag and distort. So I've got a series of tapered pin reamers that I inherited here, look. And once you've kind of cut as big a hole as you can with the drill, you basically shove the reamer in and open out the holes in the spectacle plate with a reamer. See, that's tapered, so the more you push the reamer in, the bigger the hole gets. And you can see there, that's obviously the diameter of the window there, because I've stuck a piece of tape around the reamer. So I'm guessing that that's the finished diameter of that hole. That's how I did that. And then you can see what I also had to do was cut out here relief holes for the wheels, because of course the wheels are going to protrude into this area, and here to match this. So this is cut out for the wheel here, and this bit here is cut out for the coupling rod there. And then when you've got the cab front, what I then did was got a piece of tape and just stuck the tape around the like that, around the piece I'd cut out, and mark either ends. So then you know how long this piece of brass has to be for making the cab. You can pick up the full length of the cab from this dimension here on your drawing, and then the height of the cab here. Sorry, the length of the cab at the top here, and then you can mark the height. So now you've got a long strip of brass that's got this at one end and this at the other end, and I'm quite lucky with this one because it's just one piece that you fold over, you see. So you cut that out, and again, that's just, you know, marking out and cutting up as close to the line as you feel you can, and then filing it up to the line. And then, of course, what you have to do is then just start to form these curves. Start with the bottom of the cab up against the bottom of the spectacle plate, maybe tack it on there, or maybe don't tack it on, but just put a little mark here, hold it together and just put a little mark here with I always use these sort of felt pens that are now called Sharpies, I believe. Just put a little mark there so you know where you have to start putting the curve here into the roof, and then very bit by bit, very carefully put this shape into the cab side, and now the cab roof, and then back down the other side. And really you have to make that quite a good fit, because it's not really practical to try and bend this piece around the spectacle plate. You'll just never do it. You have to make sure that the spectacle plate fits on this side as well as this side, so that you end up with a cab that is nice and square and nice and at right angles here as well.
Do you curve that round a piece of bar or something?
Well, yeah, I've got,
Or
for something like
paint?
this, I've got a selection of drills here, you know, that are of various diameters, and just use the, you know, one that gives you the right shape. You might have to usually you start, I always start with quite a big curve and then bring it in, because it's much easier to do that than to try and take it back out again.
Yeah.
And if you've not quite put the curve in the right place, you can kind of unfold it very slightly and then curve it a bit more where it needs to be curved. And you just have to take your time, and if you do it slowly, you will get that shape into it. But you need to get it very close before you start tacking the sides. Sorry, the sides and the roof to the front of the cab. It just takes quite a bit of care to do that. And then you can see the what I've done here with it's one of the things that's always a problem when you're making a cab of any type, but the window surrounds. The windows always seem to have beading around them, and it's very difficult to cut these out. Very difficult to cut a circle out, a thin sort of piece of beading that's completely circular. But I kind of lucked out with this model, because I've got these sort of pieces of K&S tubing, loads of them. They all telescope one inside the other. What I was actually doing was trying to find one that was the right diameter that I could use to draw around. And it turned out that just by luck, one of them was exactly the right diameter as the piece of beading. So I just popped that in. Well, you would just use a lathe, wouldn't you really, and just part a couple of pieces off and push them into the holes you've made for the windows. There you have it, instant beading. That was very lucky. Sometimes you just have to sit there, make a hole in the middle and cut round it, and then file it as best you can. You know, and it is very, very difficult, and it is very, very tedious. But with a bit of practice, you can do it. if you've got somebody that's prepared, that does etching and is prepared to put the window surrounds on the corner of a piece of their own work, that's even better. And there you have it. That's the cab that we've produced. And you can see that what I've done with the footplate is I've put some more of those tiny pieces of waste brass here in the corners, front and the rear corners of the cab, marked out the footprint of the cab on the top of the footplate, and then put tiny pieces of waste right in the corners, so I have something to position the cab with. You can see it just clicks in into the pieces there. So that's now quite an easy job, just to tack that to the footplate. We'll have a go at that, shall we? Start in the corner there. Right in the corner. Sorry. There we go. So I put a little dab of flux in the corner. Just gonna tack that there. Try not to solder my finger at the same time. There we go. Do this opposite corner, making sure that the cab's sitting in exactly the right place and the bottom of the cab's sitting on the footplate. And tack that corner there as well. Like so. So we've got that as we want it. Let's just push that down a little bit. There we go. Back to this corner because it's now come off. Tap that back on. Alignment problem here. Let's take the whole thing off and start again. Solder out to that corner. Go again. Cab on the alignment pins. Check everything's nice and square. Just have to scrape a bit of old solder off the edge of that. Just reduce the width.
Just got some solder in the way there, Nick.
Just some solder in the way where I took it off, yeah.
Okay.
And it's still not going to go on, so I'm going to turn it on. Go away. And just let that flatten out. There we go. That's better. I would have thought soldering the cab on would have been the bit that was the trickiest. There we go. Finally. So I'll go back and tack that in place there. Like that. See, we've got a piece there, look, to align the spectacle plate with. So we'll just tack that there. You can see all I've done throughout the whole demonstration is just put tiny tacks on, get everything exactly where you want it. Just tack it there now. You can see I'm holding the side of the cab with that finger. A little bit of solder there. Sorry, a little bit of flux. Just tap that there.
Does it help to have asbestos fingers or?
Well, I'm kind of keeping them a little bit further away from the heat than you think.
Yeah, okay.
It just goes with the territory sometimes, the burning. There we go. So now that's it. That's the, you can see we've got the cab tacked onto the footplate as well. We just need to run some solder along the bottom of the cab on both sides. And that I'm going to do on the inside because then, of course, there's less cleaning up to do.
Yeah. Did you say the cab side and roof were brass?
No, they're made of nickel silver.
They are nickel silver. Okay.
But the this piece, the bit that I've curved, the side roof and other side piece, that's cut out of 0.3 thickness nickel silver because it's much easier to get this shape into it if you do that than it is, you know, trying to do it out of 0.45. I think that's often a flaw in. I don't know whether other people find that, but if you're building a kit, nearly always the boiler and the firebox and the smoke box are all etched in 0.45, either brass or nickel silver. And it's kind of at the limit of what, you know, your kind of hobbyists rolling bars can do. And I sometimes think that if you chuck away the parts that have come in the kit and cut some new ones out, then you end up with maybe if you use 0.3 instead of 0.45, then they actually go through your rolling bars a lot better.
Yeah.
You can manipulate the curves, you know, things like this. You can manipulate with your hands, you know, rather than having to use a machine to put the shape in. So anyway, just to finish off, I'm gonna try and do this. I'm gonna, because James mentioned burny fingers, you see, I'm just gonna put a piece of wet dry in there. So if there is any heat transfer, I'm not going to be jumping up and down, screaming and shouting, and we'll put a bit of flux along there.
I quite often use a thin piece of MDF.
Yeah.
Just to do the same job.
Yeah, and then we just go along like that, one nice quick movement, solder that on. A bit more solder for the end bit there. And you can see it's just tacking and then joining up the tacks. That's really all I'm doing. And then do the other side, like so. Bit of flux along there. Minute amount of solder. I don't think you need to clean this bit up particularly because it's going to be underneath the cab footplate, isn't it? The floor of the cab is going to be raised up a little bit, so all this soldering sits below it. So, if I'm honest with you, I wouldn't bother cleaning that up. You can see a little bit's just flowed under there, so we'll just scratch that out of the way with a nice sharp scalpel, like so. There we go. Check the other side. It's also got a little bit of solder that's bled through, so we'll just scrape that off. And there we go. There we have it. That's footplate and the cab, that loco. And you can see what I did before I soldered the cab onto the footplate is I put all this beading on as well. This is actually half round brass that I had left over. I think I might have annealed it as well because it's quite difficult to form that curve there. And then this one, it's just takes forever just to solder it a bit at a time and try and bend it to the right shape. But I thought it'd just be easier to put that on while it's not attached to the footplate because there's less risk of you distorting something else when you're trying to bend the half round into place. So there we have it. There we have it. Somewhere out there, someone's got these parts. So I should put this in the post to them tomorrow, and now they've got a nice footplate with a cab on it to go with the boiler. So that's kind of most of the job done for them, I think, isn't it?
Brilliant.
To the loco body. So I think that's kind of taken me about an hour, hasn't it, to do that?
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to ask any questions for the last 30 minutes, or you want me to recap something, I'm happy to do that.
Certainly.
From the audience?
Would you solder the splashes on next?
Well, I think before I'd attempted the splashers, I would want to build the chassis next. I'd want the wheels to be on this, just to make sure that we're not having to attack these holes to make them any bigger or whatever. And then I think it would really help, you know, to make sure that you've got your clearances right before you start soldering the valances on, and without wanting to preempt the next sort of an evening with or presentation at a show. You can see that it looks from this drawing, and I've not checked against a photograph, it looks as if you've actually got two structures here. You've got the outer the outer splasher, which starts somewhere around here, possibly, and goes all the way like that. So this face here isn't in line with this face here. So this is one piece here, and then I would probably curve the top to fit that. And obviously the top here goes all the way up to the top of this portion, goes all the way up to the side of the firebox. And then you need to cut the front for this section, and probably a back as well, because almost certainly these splashes they're like a box, it's front and a back. And then you need to let that into the front splasher, chopping it away there, and then on the top as well, so that this sits against the top edge here. You can just see that's the splasher there, look, for this wheel there, dotted in there. That'll be the front of it, and so therefore you can see how you have to shape the top of this, this splasher. But that's going to be incredibly difficult because, of course, it's curved here. So I might be inclined to build the splasher, tack it to here, tack it onto the footplate, and then find out where you need to cut it here after you've formed this curve, or this curvy bit here, and then mark it out, take it back off, chop the piece out that you need there to let the splasher into. That's kind of how I'm anticipating we have to do that. And I'm not entirely sure whether this is open. I don't think it is, because the bits behind it are dotted in, aren't they? So, but that's how we'll be attempting that in a future presentation, no doubt. And then that's it, really, isn't it? I think I would then, as I said, put that part of the frame extension, plant that on here, then make that part of this, because the joint here could be hidden by, it'll be hidden by this spring here.
Yeah.
The spring lets in here. Look, it lets into the. You can see the smoke box here is curved in there at the bottom, and it's curved in to let the spring into this area here down the side of the smoke box, and that'll be really handy because it will just disguise the joint there. You won't actually see the joint, so that's nice and handy.
I think what you were saying earlier with the width of the chassis, given that particular wheel configuration, you could make that as wide as possible. I mean, you were talking about 27 millimeters being fairly typical.
Yeah.
You could probably push it out to 28.
Maybe go out to 28. It's I mean, I think the chassis does look like it's straight. So you're going to have an issue here with this radial truck, because sure, that's gonna have to kind of move from side to side, isn't it? There's going to have to be a little bit of end float on this.
That's right.
Whereas you really don't need any end float here at all. So you're right. You could kick this out to kick it out to 28 here, and you could maybe joggle it in this area here. I don't know.
You may well be able to.
Yeah. I mean, then you'd have to muck about here with the extension, and of course, then you might end up planting all this bit on the
Yes.
on the footplate there, you know, and not and just having that as a separate piece. But you'd have to look at that. I think that's probably the next area I would go before I built any of the splashes. Would be to build the chassis next, have the chassis underneath this, put the wheels in, and then make sure it'll go around 6 foot radius curve before you go any further.
I mean, on these models, do you find sometimes the splasher needs to cut into the boiler, or the boiler interferes with where the wheels are?
Yeah, I've got a feeling when you look at the drawing here that might be the case, because these are going to be they're going to go the actual width of the splasher on the model is going to be much wider than it is here in this drawing, because the back of the splasher has to go up to the inside edge again of the frame, doesn't it? You might find you're having to scallop a bit out here at the top of the splasher to avoid a conflict with the boiler. You're probably right. That is one of the things you're probably going to have to do. And of course, that'll be disguised on one side anyway by the reach rod here for your reverser. But unfortunately, on the other side, there isn't anything to disguise the fact that that's what you've done.
Yeah.
But sometimes them's the brakes, aren't they? That's just what you have to do, really.
Yeah. Another question that's come through: do you ever use photo etching for detailed parts if you're scratch building?
I do whenever possible, actually, because it keeps the cost down enormously. I work in conjunction with another builder called Mick, who does all the stuff for Finney 7. And
Is that Mick Rolfe?
No, Mick Davis.
Oh, that one, yeah. Right.
Yeah, he's always really happy to put me pieces onto the corner of etchers that he does.
Ah, right.
It kind of keeps the cost down. And it's, you know, I mean, it's a bit of a no-brainer. If you've got a cab that's got a pair of windows on either side and they've got surrounds on them, it is possible to cut out 4 window surrounds, you know, the beading. But it's very difficult to get them absolutely perfect, absolutely matching, you know, a matching pair. And it's, you know, photo etching is a bit of a no-brainer if you can get things like that done. And it's not expensive. And it just saves such a lot of time cutting pieces out. So, I mean, that's kind of a debate that's raging in the background, really, isn't it? About whether, what constitutes scratch building, you know, whether it's the pure form like this, where you just sit with a piercing saw, cutting endless hours of pieces out of nickel silver sheet, or whether you go down the other route of learning how to use CAD and photo etching them yourself. I mean, you'll save an awful lot of time. And if like me, you're doing it commercially, you save your clients an awful lot of money as well by doing it that way, which I'm sure they're always grateful of. So yes, I do that whenever I can. And it's the same with 3D printing as well, isn't it? There's lots of parts that you could get 3D printed for this, because they're not structural anyway, the chimney and the plinth here for your safety valves, and maybe even the safety valves as well. It would, you know, they're really not structural. And these days, there are some people and some 3D printing machines that can, you know, that can print things like a chimney without any layering in it at all.
Yeah.
Same with your smoke box door. Smoke box doors are actually quite difficult shapes to form. You know, you end up either having to do it on a lathe or, you know, in the end of a piece of bar rod, or you end up, you know, with a bloody sandbag or something, don't you? A leather sandbag beating a dish out in it. Or I suppose, don't people, whether anybody would know whether that would actually be you'd be able to spin something like that, you know, like. But anyway, it's much easier to get them 3D printed, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Yeah, many years ago, I worked for a company that made steel balls.
Right.
And most of them were 1/4 inch diameter, but they did occasionally make things that were 6 inches diameter.
Right.
So you can form a smoke box door around one of them.
Oh, that's a thought, isn't it? Just beat it out of
beat the thing into a piece of wood.
Yeah, oh, that's I never thought about something like that. Yeah, I mean, in the old days, I would get a piece of bar and go around to my friend's house and spin it in his lathe and literally just file the curve into it and then part the end off. And then you have to, of course, make all the straps and things and solder them all on. But that's pretty straightforward. But then, of course, it ends up being quite difficult, really, because you've got quite a solid chunk here, haven't you? And it's quite difficult to solder things to quite a heavy lump.
Alex is asking about the circular windows on the cab, which I remember you covered. Can you show us the
These?
Yes, the tool you used again?
They're just sliced out of off a piece of tube. This is sort of the K&S tube that you buy in most model shops. And it's not that one, it's the one that's slightly bigger than it. It's probably a PC. That's it there, look. It's just a slice.
Right. And that goes right the way through to the inside?
It goes right the way through to the other side, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Cool.
And I mean, it'd make it an utter nightmare to put a piece of glazing in there, won't it? But that's somebody else's problem, really, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, you could cut those out. You would start by cutting the inside diameter hole and then fretting round it as close, as close as you can, and then filing it. And it is really time consuming. And obviously, you have to make two for the outside and two for the inside, really, as well.
That's right.
So it's quite a lot of work just doing that, and it's much easier to get them photo etched, isn't it? Much easier, much cheaper. So
that's brilliant. Any other questions from anyone? If anybody would like to unmute themselves and ask a question, please do. I think one of the things that I've got from this is that, and I hope everybody else has picked it up, you don't get it right first time.
Yeah.
And as we've seen with Nick, he's soldered parts like the cab. It didn't quite go where he wanted it to go. So he took it off and had a second attempt.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we as modelers don't do often enough, where we've put something together, it's not quite right, and we think, oh, well, never mind, it'll do.
No, it won't. Take it off, do it again. Gnaws away at you at night while you're trying to sleep. That's the problem, doing that kind of thing.
That's it.
What I'm doing here is I'm just dropping a straight edge. Can you see on the footplate, just to make sure that the cab is nice and square on the footplate, and it is. And because this bit's bugging me, can you see there? I don't know whether you can see that in the camera. There's this front edge here of the footplate should be parallel with the front of the cab, and it's not. It's tapering off. I mean, you won't see that, will you? You won't see that because that'll be inside the firebox ultimately. But I just can't leave that. It's just gnawing away at me. I have to make it straight, which is just ridiculous, isn't it? Just goes to show how anally retentive I can be.
How much out is it? What are we looking at? A few thou?
Oh, yeah. It's a fraction of a millimetre. It's probably about, I'm guessing it's 0.3 out. But it won't be in 30 seconds. It'll be spot on. No.
And one thing you didn't actually show us, but you told us about, was the putting the rivets into the buffer beam. Now, are you pressing them straight into the raw material?
I have one of Dave Smith's riveting tools here. Look,
right.
So just punch the.
I've got one of them.
Yeah, everybody has one of these. That's kind of how it works, isn't it? Like that.
That's it.
And you just punch them out, and I just punched it. I mean, literally, I cut a rectangle. Can you see this?
Yeah.
I cut a rectangle. Oops, a dead insect. I cut a rectangle there for the buffer beam. You can see the points there, the positions of all of the rivets.
Yeah.
They're usually parallel to each other. They're usually in a vertical line or a horizontal line.
Yeah.
And they usually coincide with the frames. these rivets here, you have to, if there's a rivet there, then there's something on the other side that it's holding on to the buffer beam. And what this will be is probably some angle iron.
It's a piece of that angle at the back.
It's just a piece of angle there on the back to strengthen that joint.
Yeah.
So you know that that's going to line up roughly there. So you really, literally, you just, and it's very, very tedious job, you just scribe all these lines on the underside of the buffer beam and then just stamp them out with Dave Smith's stamping machine.
So were you using 0.45 material?
It was 0.45, yeah, for both buffer beam and the drag beam. And Dave's tool works really quite well with 0.45. As long as the adjacent rivets aren't sat on your anvil next to each other when you're punching them out, then it kind of doesn't really distort the piece too badly. You can always straighten it out a bit, can't you, before you start soldering.
Okay, interesting. I mean, even on an etched kit, if you're pressing rivets out, it still bends the metal.
Yeah, well, it kind of does, doesn't it? Yeah, you're
even
right.
the far-fetched holes.
Yeah. I mean, it does distort it a little bit, but you can, you kind of punch a line of rivets and then kind of straighten it up, then punch the next line of rivets. Okay. And you have to remember that it'll distort in both planes as well, won't it? It'll distort that way and that way as well. So you have to do it both ways. But it's not apparent on a piece like that. It's quite easy to do. It's difficult. It'd be difficult if it had a low row of rivets like those Great Western Railway engines have always, the tender, where the side sheet of the tender comes down to meet the footplate, there's always a riveted strip all the way around the perimeter of the tender.
Yeah. And
sometimes the kit will have an half-etched piece, won't it, with the rivets pre-formed in it. But often it doesn't. You have to. I did a Scorpio kit of a broad gauge loco, and that didn't. You had to go all the way along this strip, punching out the rivets. And of course, you end up with a thing that really starts to curl up, and it's quite difficult to make that straight again and put it back on. But I mean, of course, you are soldering up against a flat piece, aren't you? So you do have that as a guide.
The half round beading you used on the cab, is that? Yes. Where'd you get that from?
I think that it came in a kit, and there was so much of it that I saved it.
Okay.
But I know that Eileen's sell it, Eileen's Emporium, and I know that Bobby Holidays also sell it as well. And I'm sure that there are other suppliers. I'm sure that is it Tracy Tools? The one it's just D section. Half round strip, and it's really good for beading. Well, it isn't. It's very difficult to get a radius like that in it and to keep the flat face of the D section flat. Obviously when you put that curve in it, it wants to twist over like that. It's quite keep forcing it back and then doing it a bit more, and then and sometimes with a quite a big curve like that, you can kind of tack it here and then butch it around a bit and then tack it there and then move it around a bit more and tack it there, and just gradually form that curve.
And you anneal it first, which would...
Well, I think I did with this. I can't remember. It was weeks ago when I made this, but I'm pretty sure I just licked it through the gas flame downstairs on the...
You'll need to, because that type of wire is drawn, so it's work hardened.
So
it will need softening.
Just lick it through the flame and just let it go, and then it was fine. You can see I've not quite finished it off there. I mean, there's some snotty bits of solder. See, while we're chatting, I'm kind of turning it around and around and around and spotting all the flaws in it, aren't I?
Rob's just mentioned that Metalsmith in Leeds do the half round beading.
Right. Yeah. He's the guy that I get all of my brass and nickel silver sheet off, because he only lives just up the motorway, and it's quite nice just to get your bike out on a nice day, isn't it? And blast up the motorway to Leeds and get yourself your.
Yes, if you like motorbikes.
If you like motorbikes, you can always stop at Warren's on the way for a coffee and a chit chat, can't you? Because he lives on the way.
Any excuse.
In Ossett. have a quick chat with
Okay.
you. Anybody else got any questions?
No further ones coming through at the moment.
Right.
I think that's been very informative, and I've actually got an engine to finish off scratch building myself, so I'm encouraged to get on with it.
It's really not as difficult as you think. I'm afraid there's no kind of magic shortcuts or anything like that. It is just sat there patiently cutting things out. And you can see what I'm doing now is just making sure that the because the buffer beam here and the drag beam here are parallel, are rectangles. It should sit on a piece of flat glass, and not rock. And you can see it rocks very slightly there. So this corner's a bit higher, so you can just give it a bit of a twist. So that you take that out, so just a little bit at a time, a little bit of a twist. You can see it's gone now, can't you?
Yeah. Brilliant.
There we go. So that's nice and straight and square everywhere now.
Great.
I'm happy with that.
And marking out, you use a scriber, I presume, don't you?
Oh, well, I don't have a
Sure.
scriber actually. I just use a scalpel. I'm
Really?
one of those terrible people that uses verniers for marking out. I know you shouldn't, but I guess we all do it, don't we? Don't we?
Yes.
When I admit to it, you kind of dial up your measurements on your vernier, and then you can kind of do that dreadful thing where you go along the edge of the sheet and use the jaws of the vernier to scribe a line in the metal. That's such bad workshop practice, isn't it?
For those watching this demonstration, please do not do what Nick does.
I mean, it's dreadful, isn't it? You should transfer this into some parallel scribers, shouldn't you, and use
Of course
those.
you should.
But I don't have any. I haven't got any, so I can't.
Right.
So,
Christmas present coming up then for Nick.
yeah. New verniers. New verniers, because the tips are worn here from. My son's an engineer. He's got a digital pair upstairs, and when he's out, I use those.
Just don't tell him.
I know. He's back from university. He's brought all his kit with him, and it's much better than mine. It's really annoying.
Okay, shall we? Are you happy to wrap
Right,
up?
just ask a question.
Go for it, Tony.
You mentioned marking out and scribing off to get your centre lines for all your rivet punching.
Yeah.
Have you thought of actually printing off an exact scale, a spare copy of the plan, cutting out the buffer beam bit and gluing it onto the metal?
Could do that, I suppose, like make a template to punch through.
Well, as you know, I've been building this Selby Bridge with over 8,000 rivets, and that's exactly what I did with all the rivets. I got the like a grid.
Oh, right, okay, and punch through it.
And just simply glued the paper onto the strips of metal.
Yes.
And then put through it.
Why didn't I think of that? You could even cut this out, couldn't you, if it was the right size? And having known how far under it is, 3%, shrunk by 3%. I don't know why that is. That must be something to do with my printer. Because this came as a PDF to me, so you would have thought it was exact. The PDF was, the exact size, but for some reason my printer always prints things a tiny bit smaller. But if this, if you could enlarge this on the printer so that it was the right size, you could just cut it out and stick it on, and I've really no idea why I didn't think of that, Tony. But I tell you what, I'll be doing it next time and claiming that it was my idea.
Too late, you got it. You've had it from me.
You heard it here first, folks. That's how to do it.
I think actually one of the benefits of scribing the lines is that you can get the point of the rivet press into the cross that you've created.
You can.
And that lines it up beautifully. One of the problems with trying to use a drawing is that you're not necessarily going to press in exactly the same place.
I mean, the riveting tool that I've got does have a kind of a guide here. So you can kind of set the width, can't you? And then if you just kind of move your workpiece along after each,
Right.
punched each rivet, they're all going to be in line. And also, there's a plastic thingy here. Can you see that's it fits over the anvil of the riveting tool, and can you see it's eccentric? And if you pop that over there, like so, over the anvil, then you can vary the spacing between the rivets by twisting that round, you know, and so they can be, you know, I mean, it's quite crude, but you can do it like that. Okay. And then so you can get them in a nice straight line and with nice even spacing as well. But sometimes with if you've got sort of a riveted smoke box or something like that, sometimes I just use the width of the radius of the anvil there. Well, you can't see it, can you? I'm pointing on the anvil. Use the radius of the anvil there, and that sets out the spacing of the rivets. Sometimes it's not quite right, is it? But so long as they're straight and you know, kind of evenly spaced, then the spacing doesn't really matter that much, does it? It's all about making sure it's neat. I think that's perhaps a bit more important than the spacing itself. I was doing something the other day. I was doing a saddle tank. It was one of those Agenoria locos I was building for someone, and it was a saddle tank, and the saddle had rows of rivets over the top. And the piece that was in the kit, it was a pre-etched wrapper for the saddle, and you got some formers that went inside it, so you're kind of making it in that way, and then some end pieces to go on when you'd finished. And the problem with it is it on the back it had half-etched lines, in parallel half-etched lines in the back to form the curve underneath the bottom of the saddle, where it comes back down and up and it returns back to the boiler. And these half-etched lines were there to try and help you with that, achieve that curve. But what they were actually doing was just putting threatening bit lines into it. And then you had to flat them out. But of course, you'd already punched the rivets out at that stage. So flat out the lines that were being caused by these sort of half-etched lines. You couldn't get rid of them because you were going to lose the rivet. So in the end, I ended up drawing around it and cutting a piece out of nickel silver, you know, 0.3 nickel silver. And then I had to put all the rivets back into it. And I had to do that thing that I should have done. If I'd have knowing what Tony's just said, I would have done it like that, you know, and traced out the positions of all the rivets and stuck a piece of paper over the top and done it like that. But you have to get all the rivets perfectly parallel to each other, and they all have to be in alignment as well, all the way over the top. Otherwise, it just looks a bit, you know, poor. And that took forever to get that piece right. But it did mean, you know, that because it was made out of 0.3, you could manipulate it by hand. You could get the curve over the top to match the formers, and the returns at the bottom as well. You could do that. You can fold it around a piece of rod or something like that, or the shank of a drill, you know, because it wasn't a very long saddle. And it did work out better to do that, to scrap the piece that was in the kit, because you've got these daft fold lines on the back. Often if you've got a tender that goes up and flares out, not a tender, sorry, a bunker on the back of a tank engine that's vertical and then it flares out at the top. Often the piece that you get in the kit for it's got those lines etched into the back, hasn't it, to try and help you to get the curve. But it doesn't. All you end up with is a series of lines, you know, witness lines on the outside, where it's just a threepenny bit curve like that. And I often find it's better to just cut another one out, you know, out of thinner material and just, you know, form it around a piece of rod. You end up with a much neater job in the end. And you know, that's kind of what I got to with this. You know, I cut it out of thin material, and you can just manipulate that around drills, drill shanks, or bits of rod or bits of tube, anything that you've got that's about the right diameter. And that was the same. That was the way that if you watch the earlier video that I did, you can see I've got some various size rods here on the end of my workbench, and you cut a strip out, for instance, for the smoke box, and then you manipulate. You put these curves in using various, drill shanks are very good for this because they're long enough. They're easily long enough to form these curves around them, and you just have to do it bit by bit and just kind of work your way around. You can do this with a bigger diameter rod, just a little bit at a time, just getting a little bit of shape into it, and just forming it bit by bit. And you have to be really careful that getting these curves. Sometimes if you bend it too much, it ends up almost folding, and it's very difficult then to flat the fold line out. In fact, I can see this has got one just there that I'm going to flat out in a minute when the camera's off. That probably, that's something that it's just folded a little bit there, look, and you can just see when the light catches it. There's a little kink in it rather than it being a continuous curve. And you can feel it with your finger as well. You just need to you can just flat out like that with some wet and dry. Just feel it again to make sure it's gone. And that's how you kind of form all these shapes, just very slowly. And make sure that they're quite close to the former before you start soldering it up as well. You can't use the former to get that shape into it. You have to make the shape match the former. And I think that's perhaps a problem that some people have, isn't it? Forming shapes. Often the instructions encourage you to tack it here and then use the cab front or some kind of former to put the shape all the way along into it, and you can't do that. You just can't do that. And also, if you use this as a former, you can quite easily put a witness mark there where you're trying to bend it round it. And if you've moved this to the middle, you'll put a witness mark in it, and you won't see the witness mark until you start painting the loco, by which time it's a bit too late, isn't it? And you see that quite a lot. And there's a famous MOK kit that the boiler has a half-etched line inside it for a former to fit in. And when you look, about 90% of them, when they've been painted, you can see a witness mark where the former's inside, because it fits inside an half-etched sort of groove inside the boiler. And when you form the boiler around it, it leaves a witness mark on the outside. So you need to watch out for stuff like that. You can feel it, or just catch it in the light, and you can just see where there's any flat bits where it's not continuous curve. But I think that's okay now. Done that one there. Tiny one there as well. I'll go at that.
Mark one finger. It's brilliant, isn't it?
So what, sorry?
Mark one finger.
Yeah. You can feel it. You can just feel it. If you just run your finger over the top, you can feel it. Or if you just, kind of catch the light, turn it in the lamp, and you can just see how the light shines on it. You just catch any high spots and just whiz them off. Like so. There we go. It's fine now. Be confident when that was painted, it was a continuous curve rather than any kinks in it.
Good.
There we go.
Right. Thank you very much, Nick.
You're welcome.
Very informative and very entertaining. And the time, I don't know about you, but time's whipped past.
I think that's about your 90 minutes, isn't it?
Indeed it is.
96.
No, getting some good comments. Very interesting session from one person. I've lost it.
That's
So,
Dave.
Can you see?
Dr. Dave.
thanks for a great night. I've picked up a few tips. You're a great teacher.
Oh, thank you very much. That's
That's
great.
lovely. Right, I'm going to finish this off. I don't think we've got any further questions now. So I'm going to spotlight myself for a moment and just finish off with some slides, which I need to remember how to do this.
Share screen.
Indeed. That's absolutely right, mate. Right, let's share this one. Okay, should be able to see. So I hope. Yes? You see that, Tony?
Yep, we got it.
Great. Okay, so firstly, thank you very much to Nick for a very interesting session tonight. Our next evening with will be creating a layout or diorama based on a real place or event with members of the Luton No Gauge group. And they did the Great Train Robbery, which is something many of you may have seen at shows. So I think that's going to be an entertaining evening. Advance tickets are available for Guildex. So I hope that all of you will be coming to Guildex in September at the new site in Stafford. And for any non-members who may be here this evening, we have a try before you buy scheme available for the Gauge Guild, where you can try our membership out for a month. So sign up on the website for that. Then you can join the guild and enjoy all of the facilities that we offer our members. This is where you find it on the Gauge Guild website. It's on the About Us menu here, and then the Join Online function. Thank you all very much for attending tonight. Thank you again to Nick for an excellent session. And we'll see you again on Friday, the 26th of August.
Bye all. Thanks very much.
Just one further thing, you'll be able to book from midnight tonight for that session.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony.
If you remember, like I forgot.
Yes. Yes, we won't mention that, will we, Tony, that you forgot?
No.
No, we didn't say a word about it.
No.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to close the session now. So
Thank you.
Stop the share and good night. God bless.
Good night.
Right, thank you.
Bye.